Some Habs prospect talk today. We'll start with Juraj Slafkovsky struggling, but then bouncing back in this last game against the Blues. We'll talk about some NCAA standouts for the Habs, including Lane Hutson, who's on a tear, Jacob Fowler, and a lot more. And then what's a realistic draft pick for them in the 2024 NHL Draft? We'll discuss all that and more on this episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi and Sebastian, joined by Sebastian. Hi, and we've got a very Habs-centered show for you today. We'll start off by talking about Yuraj Slafkovsky's recent struggles and how and why he bounced back in this last game against the St. Louis Blues. We'll also discuss some NCAA standouts for the Habs. Obviously, Lane Hutson is probably going to have a Hobie Baker wrapped up by the end of December. We'll also talk about Luke Tuck, Jacob Fowler, kind of break down their games and how they've been doing so far. Then in our final segment, we'll discuss some realistic 2024 NHL draft picks for the Habs. We'll discuss first kind of where we expect them to finish, and then based on that, we'll kind of draft up a list of players we think would be a good fit for the Canadiens in this upcoming draft. Before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Spotify, Odyssey, or wherever you get your podcasts, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So we'll get things started here with Juraj Slafkovsky. First and foremost, how do you describe his games 2 through 10 approximately for the Habs so far? How's that fared for him?
Static.
Yeah.
It was very, very static. Let's just say that replacing Kirby Duck with Josh Anderson on that line did not work stylistically. I don't think that you can really find two less complementary players in the Habs lineup than Slafkovsky and Anderson.
Yeah.
Where Slafkovsky is a good playmaker and Anderson is a good shooter, Slafkovsky still relies on his teammates to create space for him. And we saw that on his goal against St. Louis. It was a power play marker, a nice give and go with Newhook in space. And then Brendan Gallagher bought him space in the lane to the net front and he scored. And he needs his teammates to create some space for him to execute because he's yet to fully learn how to execute high-end plays in tight situations under heavy pressure at the NHL level. Also, in large part due to refining scouting habits still being a work in progress here. But yeah, it was static. It was painful. It was a slog to watch. But I think that you could have, we talked about this before we started recording, but you could have put Slafkovsky on either the first or the third line and it would have made a big difference. Players like Monahan, Pearson, Gallagher would also have really, really benefited him as not just as NHL veterans, but as players that are really, really sound in terms of their off-puck habits offensively. They're really, really good at buying each other space. And Slafkovsky needs exactly that. On the first line, I thought that he was quite good. There were definitely some sequences where I thought it wasn't a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but he was showing a lot more creativity. He had a lot more space to work with. I saw him charging up the middle lane way more often because every single rush wasn't being overextended by Josh Anderson sprinting up the wing into the boards. And having that more methodical approach in transition is far, far more effective for Slafkovsky's style. But yeah, it's been one game now with that top line, and it's far from now a winning formula yet, but definitely more hopeful. And I thought that Slafkovsky definitely had his best performance against St. Louis since Kirby Dach's injury.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that kind of played into the fact that Slafkovsky was struggling on that line with Newhook and Anderson is not just the fact that Newhook, replacing Dach with Anderson is about the weirdest change in a line that you can make, but it's also the fact that Alex Newhook was muted to the center, and Newhook is so clearly not a natural center. it doesn't work really as well for him. He's really speedy. He's able to connect plays really well. But I felt like Slafkovsky was taking a lot of the defensive responsibilities on that line, and that put him in a position where he was often reloading way above the puck in
Oh
the
yeah.
offensive zone. He was kind of trying to read when the next inevitable turnover would happen. And that put him in a lot of defensive situations and a lot of reactive situations. This was not necessarily where Slafkovsky excels. You move him to that line with Suzuki and Caulfield, all of a sudden you've got two players who, like you said, can find him in space, but also two players that are a bit more unpredictable than Newhook and Anderson. Newhook and Anderson, they're going to sprint up. They're going to challenge players one-on-one and try to gain the offensive zone. So when the defensive formation is reacting to that, they know that it's going to be a one-on-one fight with Anderson. There's not even going to be a look for a pass. So what that does is it frees them up to focus on Anderson and frees up the entire rest of the lineup that's on the ice to kind of man mark and either cover Slafkovsky, cover Newhook, prevent them from having that space. Whereas Suzuki and Caulfield are two players who you never know what they're going to do with the puck on their stick. At that moment, you start seeing, especially Caulfield, the way he moves off the puck and draws players out of position. And especially with Suzuki with that shoot pass toggle on point. He never shoots when he shouldn't and never passes when he shouldn't. He times his plays to perfection. So that usually leads to a double teaming at some point, at some time on during that shift. And Slafkovsky's really good at understanding that because he's improved his scanning and finding soft ice. And that's what we saw a lot with that line. They generated 9 dangerous scoring chances where the rest of the Habs lineup created 3. That gives you a good idea of how good that line was. And I was talking about that after the game, during the game, the last game that they played before the St. Louis one. And we saw Alex Newhook, Brendan Gallagher, Josh Anderson, Yoel Armia, Jesse Ylönen, like all getting shifts on that top line with Suzuki and Caulfield, but not Slafkovsky. And I was just wondering, well, if he doesn't even get a might as well look at the first line, what's the point in keeping him in the NHL? And we saw immediately after that game against St. Louis what he can do with players who can find him so well and draw players away from him. Really good playmaking, smart, small area passes, developing play incrementally. I was really, really impressed with what Slafkovsky did in that game. Do you see that as a potential kind of top line for as long as Doc's out, or do you see the Habs kind of rotating quickly away from that after a loss in last game? Because it was a loss, even though that top line was the best line. Do you see Martin St. Louis looking at the scoreboard and being like, yeah, maybe I should shake this up? Or does he see what we see and kind of keep them together, keep them as a cohesive group and help them, all three of them, develop chemistry? Because they did in the game that they played together. I was fairly impressed.
I'd love to see Slafkovsky stick around there, or at the very least shift between that line and that third line with the vets.
Yeah.
That said, Slafkovsky hasn't been playing many minutes since he's been in the NHL. So
Yeah.
putting him on the top line, one issue that we might see is conditioning and playing an 82-game season. If you're playing top line minutes, you're getting upwards of 17 a night. That's a big upgrade for Slafkovsky, especially considering that if you're looking at that top power play unit, there's a pretty easy swap you can make to improve it too by swapping in Slafkovsky for Anderson, because Anderson's about as effective on that top power play right now as he was on that Slafkovsky on the Slaf line for the entire season so far. But then if you're also giving Slafkovsky that top power play time, I think that you should see him get tired pretty quickly. So I'd be really intrigued to see if the Habs would be open to taking, even just in the short term, the Leo Carlson development approach with Slafkovsky of giving him top line minutes, playing him 20 minutes, and giving him rest days, giving him games where he's a healthy scratch, but it's communicated to him as this is just to work up your conditioning, like extra time in the gym, extra time off ice with coaches, dissecting plays, and kind of putting in effort in various areas of the game apart from just playing every single game on that top line. I think that the approach that Anaheim's taken with Carlson is a very patient and intelligent one. And we've seen that, look, Carlson's being scratched whenever he is playing. He's logging around 22 minutes a night. and he's doing really, really well. He's playing excellent hockey when he's on the ice. And I think that patient approach is an intelligent one. And the Habs have a lot of options with Slafkovsky. They can leave him on in that middle six. They can leave him on the top line. They could send him to Laval. They have many options. They could send him to the World Junior Championships in December and January. But I think that at least starting off, maybe like in the upcoming month, giving him the opportunity of playing big minutes with the option of rest days in there would be really beneficial. And the Habs have players to rotate in. You can rotate Jesse Ylönen on that first line with Slafkovsky, where Slafkovsky plays 2/3 of the game and Ylönen plays the other third. That could work. Ylönen plays well with other skilled players. We've seen him play with Suzuki and Caulfield sporadically, both this season and last. Yeah. And I think that could be an interesting development approach. But either way, I think that the worst place for Slafkovsky was that line with Anderson and Newhook at center on that second line. So anywhere apart from that is a bit of an upgrade. But I'm curious to see how his development continues throughout the season.
Absolutely. So am I. And these are great ideas to help him develop. But that wraps things up for our first segment about Juraj Slafkovsky. We'll be moving on to some NCAA standouts for the Montreal Canadiens system, including Lane Hutson, who's on a tear. We'll talk about that right after these messages from our sponsors over at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, and LEDs. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your car, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, which is only available for U.S. customers, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. The new NHL season has begun, and it comes with all sorts of possibilities. Who's going to score 50 goals this season? Is it going to be Cole Caulfield, Connor McDavid, or will Sidney Crosby hit the milestone yet again in his illustrious career? And your favorite team could even hoist the Stanley Cup. And you can get in on the action by joining the Sleeper Fantasy Hockey app. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports and especially hockey, because you can get the chance to win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. All you have to do is pick whether the studs of the game, whether it be Connor Bedard or Connor McDavid, register particular stats in any given game. To win 100 times your cash on Sleeper, all you need to do is correctly predict the outcome of 8 specific player stats. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll be talking about Lane Hutson, Luke Tuck, and Jacob Fowler, who have been playing fairly well in the NCAA so far. We'll start off with Lane Hutson, who's, again, just on a tear. I mean, he just doesn't show any signs of slowing down. He's in his second NCAA campaign. He's a sophomore now. He made the shortlist, the top 10 shortlist for the Hobey Baker last year, and justifiably so. And it was a travesty that he didn't make the final 3. But this year he's basically putting a bow on it from the start of the season. He got 6 goals in 7 games, including a hat trick in last game. You watched that game in detail. Talk us through what really impressed you from Hutson in that game. And is there any progress in the key areas of his game that we wanted to see progress in?
I've seen pretty decent progress across the board with Lane Hutson this season. He's just continuing to develop at the same rate that we've been seeing for the last 2 years. And that game where he scored a hat trick was a really entertaining one. BU actually lost despite his hat trick, but he played excellently in the offensive zone. We've seen his chemistry with Matt Celebrini continue to take steps every single game. Like they often don't even have to even like look in each other's direction to know where each other are, and that link up is like the most dynamic that we've seen in the NCAA so far this season. And I think the biggest contender with Lane Hutson for that Hobie Baker Award is exactly his teammate Macklin Celebrini. Like it is a very, very fun combination of skill sets there. And Hutson played an excellent game. I thought in the offensive zone, he's still somehow getting better at leveraging his deception to access space and create lanes and to shift defensive structures and to fall behind coverage. And his off puck routes, I think, are still getting better in the offensive zone. His defensive play, I think, is also becoming a bit better. We've seen him be a lot more effective in using his skating while defending transition. And while the pivots are still something that needs some work, I don't think that really matters too much just yet. Like he has time to still work on those. And let's just say if that's our one qualm with his game, he's doing pretty well for himself. And Lane Hutson's a ton of fun still. He's more fun to watch now than he was in his draft year, which is absurd to me because I was glued to my screen for that entire year scouting him, and he's only getting better. And I think that the likely outcome is that we see him in the NHL at the end of this season, and that he likely already has a top 4 role upon arrival. So Hudson's development has been spectacular, and the future is very, very bright in terms of the future first power play quarterback in Montreal.
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of Habs fans concerned, and reasonably so, regarding small-ish, decent skating kind of offensive defensemen, and they immediately think of Victor Mete or Eric Brandstrom or all of these kind of failed projects. But I want to point out that Lane Hutson is already a better creator and a more intelligent offensive mind than either of them ever were.
And
And
he's
on
scored
top,
more goals in the last 24 hours than Victor Mete scored in the last 3 years.
yeah, basically. On top of that, Hudson has this ability to find the back of the net that Mete never had either. It's never been a strength, and it's one of the things that was immediately pointed out anytime you watch him is that not only is his offensive activation just not a thing, Victor Mete, but it's also when he did activate, his shot was so whippy and weak that there was just no chance he was going to score on an NHL goaltender. Hudson can score on an NHL goaltender for sure, but on top of that, the confidence on the puck that Lane Hutson has, Eric Brandstrom never had that. Victor Mete never had that. I mean, it's just on a different level. The things he's able to do with the puck, I don't want to see any comparisons to any other small left-handed offensive defenseman if it's not Quinn Hughes, because that's the closest you get in terms of his offensive ceiling. He's been ridiculous, and Quinn Hutson has been as well so far this season for Quinn Hughes rather. It's so weird because Lane Hutson has a brother called Quinn as well,
who
but
also
he's
plays
a
with
forward.
BU.
Exactly, but he's a forward. But no, Quinn Hughes has been insane this season, and you can see what a really good offensive creative mind can do with the puck. And I feel like Lane Hutson is closer to Quinn Hughes in terms of ceiling than anywhere near Eric Brandstrom and Victor Mete. But we'll only know when he hits the NHL.
Of course,
Moving on to another BU player, though, we've got Luke Tuck, who's been playing decent minutes on Boston University, and especially has been playing a lot of his time with Macklin Celebrini on that top line. The thing is, you watch a lot of their play, and a lot of the points that Celebrini puts up, aren't caused aren't caused by Luke Tuck. A lot of the points that Luke Tuck is putting up are caused by Macklin Celebrini. I still have major concerns with Tuck and his game and the way that it's developing because, I see a lot of Habs fans curious about how, what kind of player they're getting because they see, oh, he's got a player. He's got a brother who's playing in an NHL top 6 and doing a really good job, and he's he's got a lot of stature to him, and he's playing really well and all that. But they're just fundamentally different players. I think that you look at Luke Tuck's production so far: 8 points in 8 games, playing on a line with a player who's got 14 points in 8 games. And you still see the same concerns that we saw last year. He's a very linear player, a very straightforward player. Doesn't really switch lanes at all in transition. Doesn't really hop into the middle or out to the outside. Most of his rushes are in one direction. And he's a really quick skater. His skating's powerful, and it's he's able to pick up speed really quickly. But for me, what makes a player a good skater is their ability to use crossovers to get from lane to lane and confuse players. Tuck just doesn't do that. On top of that, there's a lot of tunnel vision with him. He gets a puck in a dangerous area. Oftentimes, he's just gonna throw it on net or dump it in. And that's how Celebrini's gotten a lot of his points. Is that Tuck will basically either be barreling up the wing, he'll make him a pass, and Tuck will shoot it in, or Tuck will just throw it in the offensive zone and leave Celebrini to fight two 50-50 battles and try to kind of cycle it up for a point. But overall, I don't really see what the pathway to the NHL is for Tuck because he already has trouble reading the NCAA game. And that hasn't really improved since he started playing in the NCAA. So I don't see what the pathway to him learning how to read the NHL game is. Do you see one, or this is it still kind of a puzzling, kind of selection for the Habs, and a one that could kind of end up being a player like many prospects who ends up not making the NHL?
I mean, I don't think I would have drafted Luke Tuck in his draft year, let alone the second
Yeah.
round. But I, I do think that there's a path. I think when you play the style of play that Luke Tuck plays, there is always a path.
Mhm.
You could he could realistically fill out the role of like that traditional linear physical fourth line winger
Yeah.
so you still see a lot of NHL teams like valuing, right? Like the Ryan Reeves role in Toronto, like apart from the fighting, obviously, but like the
Mhm.
actual like on ice role that Ryan Reeves plays in Toronto, which he isn't doing as well now as he used to, but Luke Tuck could maybe kind of fit in that type of role, and there's still a demand for that role around the league. Definitely, like the pedigree of being drafted in the second round and being the brother of Alex Tuck will, I think, also improve his chances of hitting the NHL. But I doubt it's with the Habs, especially considering just how much depth they have, and there's a lot more interesting and dynamic and skilled and versatile
Yeah.
players in the Habs prospect pool that are in the same like trajectory in terms of like timeline as Luke Tuck is.
Mhm.
But he's doing well, and I could see the Habs maybe like flipping him for another draft pick or something if they get an offer this season, because again, with as much depth as the Habs have in their prospect pool, you can't even hand out contracts to everyone, and his contract will be coming up pretty soon.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another issue. Is just especially the bottom six depth that the Habs have in terms of prospects, guys that are almost surefire, plug and play bottom sixers who could work their way up. There's just too many of them to kind of justify keeping around Luke Tuck. But we'll see how that kind of develops with him, and if there's any progress on that side. BU is a team we'll be watching a lot this season. Finally, we'll talk about a Boston College goaltender, Jacob Fowler. When he earned goalie of the month in the NCAA Hockey East Division, as a rookie, as a freshman, which is always really good to see. And he's been stellar, really. I mean, you watch him play, and just there's a composure, there's a poise to his game that's really impressive. He's able to kind of keep track of pucks as they follow around, and he's one of the smarter goaltenders that I've seen.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
understand the game really well. Knows the handedness of most shooters in his league, and
and their
reacts in
habits.
response to that. Yeah, he knows how players play, and that really shapes a goaltender because there's a lot of anticipation to his game. There's a lot of either he'll close a post early on a player who knows has a tendency to shoot from the corner, or he'll let him go if he knows he's a passer. There's an adaptability to his game that's really interesting, and I'm excited to see how Jacob Fowler continues to kind of develop, because at the moment of his selection, that was, I'd say, the one pick the Habs made in that draft where I was really, really happy with it.
Yeah, me
I,
too.
I immediately when they made that pick, I was like, that is not only a great fit, but also great value based on where they're picking. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how that develops. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll talk about some realistic 2024 NHL draft picks for the Habs in our third segment. Stick around for that. We'll first talk about where we think the Habs will end up at the end of the day, and then we'll kind of go from there and try to see who we would pick in those positions. That's coming up after these messages from our sponsors over at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many options what you can do with those bonus bets, whether it be spreads or player props, over and unders, and more. Whether you want to bet on your favorite team to win the Super Bowl or your favorite player to score a touchdown or throw for a touchdown, or maybe there's a quarterback in the league that you just really don't like and you want to bet that they're going to throw 3 interceptions in a game. The choice is yours. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so for our final segment, we'll start off by talking about where we think the Habs will end up on draft day, and then kind of work through that to kind of see what players we would consider in that range. So let's start with our first point here. I think the Habs will end up in kind of the 8 to 14 range. They've got a decent goaltender tandem that's been easily winning them games on their own, and I think that could continue for a fair while with 2 shots at it. I mean, you've got Jake Allen, who's a very streaky goaltender, and you have Samuel Montembeault, who's one of the most surprisingly streaky goaltenders in
Yeah.
the NHL. He's been putting up decent numbers and playing fairly well. I think on their own, these two might win them a good, it might like in isolation win them maybe 20 games. On top of that, you add the fact that they've got a decent core of players who are building chemistry. A third line that's working better than most third lines, and Pearson, Monahan, and Gallagher, the veteran line there, which has been carrying its weight. Sean Monahan's on a tear. Josh Anderson doesn't have a goal yet, and it's inevitable that will change. I think there's enough moving parts there that the Habs end in kind of the no man's land of not making the playoffs, but not being in that kind of top 5 conversation either. And yeah, I think that the 8 to 14 range could be realistic for them. But what's your thoughts on that before we proceed?
I think that streaky goaltending is streaky for a reason. I don't think it's going to be sustained throughout the season. We saw last year Montembeault went crazy, and the Habs would have had a top 3 pick if it weren't for his heroics throughout the season.
Yeah.
And I don't think that will be replicated this season. The Habs are also always just one injury away from a tailspin, right? If any of Suzuki, Caulfield, and either goaltender go down, that's kind of it, right? Like we saw it last season. As soon as Caulfield was out of the lineup, the power play was clearly the worst in the league. There was zero dynamism. There was nothing interesting going on, and it was a slog to both watch and witness. So I think that the Habs are going to end up in that 5 to 8 range in the draft this year. Especially considering that they've been overperforming to start the season, by every metric, whether it be expected goals or Corsi or anything you want to look at, really. The Habs have been overperforming, and I think that's going to regress.
For sure. And I think it's kind of, right now they're easily overperforming their expectations and their abilities. They're an above 500 team, which is just ridiculous. But if we were to say, for example, that they finish at 8, let's settle on that 8th overall.
It's the overlap of our ranges. Yeah,
exactly. And let's look at the options. So let's focus first on what kind of they would go for realistically in that position. With David Reinbacher picked in last year's draft, Logan Mailloux, who we don't even know where the Habs stand on really in terms of where they think his upside is. And I think that changes things a bit, but also Justin Barron on right D. I think that they've kind of tried to solve the right D issue and kind of patched it a little bit. So I think that's not as much of a concern as it used to be. Left D, they have no problems. I mean, I don't think they need to pick up anyone else. They have Lane Hutson, Caden Gooley, Jordan Harris, a lot more. Matthias Norlinder's system, Adam Engstrom has been playing really well. The list goes on and on and on. William Trudeau, we're comfortable with these names, and I think that left D is not as a non-issue. I don't think they're going for a left-handed defenseman unless he's genuinely the best player available. Like, for example, if Sam Dickinson falls to 8, sure.
Or Salayev.
Or it's on Salayev at 8. It's a bit rich for me, though. I think, especially.
I think he's gone by 8. I don't think he falls to 8.
No. What I mean is that it's rich in the sense that, even if he is available, which he probably won't be, I don't think the Habs go that direction. But if we focus on some forwards here,
Yeah.
Cole Eiserman is going to be gone for sure. Cayden Lindstrom, I think, could very well be gone by 8. If I'd be extremely surprised if he's not. Given the fact that Nate Danielson was picked at 9th overall, I don't like Cayden Lindstrom is a way better version of Nate Danielson, and
Yeah.
teams love that kind of guy. The big, strong, physical player with an edge, but also plays with a lot of intelligence, a lot of, meticulousness and maturity. I think he's gone by 8.
That said, I think if he is available when the Habs are picking, they're
He's the
sprinting to the
most
podium to
Habs
draft
pick.
him.
Yeah, he is
Yeah.
just the most Habs pick you could take at 8 if he's
He's a
available.
massive center, very versatile, really toolsy, very intelligent. Everything they're looking for, he ticks the boxes. So I
Exactly.
think if he's on the board, he's the guy. But
For sure.
as you said, there's a good chance he's no longer there at 8.
Exactly. So in terms of realistic options, guys who are realistically going to be available, I don't think it's out of the question that Ivan Demidov falls in that range. Even teams don't like usually the kind of smaller, more creative options, and we've
Yeah.
seen that with Frank Nazar, with Seth Jarvis, with even Cole Caulfield. Like their teams tend to shy away from smaller, more skillful players. And speaking of which, I'd say Berkeley Catton is in that conversation as well. Those are two
Yeah.
guys that I could very realistically see the Habs kind of having available to them in that range. But the question is, do the Habs take either one of them? I think if Demidov falls there, I don't think the Habs are going to make the same mistake that they did with Michkov again. I'm hoping at least that they're able to
I
learn
could
from
see
their
it.
mistakes.
I can see
Yeah,
them passing. Like I think one name that would be an interesting one and a fit with like what the Habs value and what their draft record and Nick Bobrov's draft record would kind of align with would be Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. I
I was
think
going to
he'd
say,
be a good
yeah,
fit. I think that the Habs scouting staff would be really, really, really happy with him. Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is I don't know if this makes sense, but he's like if David Reinbacher were a forward in this draft class in terms of how
yeah,
the Habs scouting staff could view him in terms
mhm,
of really effective playing big minutes versus pro competition in Europe, has a lot of physical tools. He's a lot more refined than Reinbacher was last year. He's a ton of fun to watch. Has a really good overall toolkit. This is a player who can play a variety of roles, ranging from skillful power forward to shutdown defensive winger. And I think the Habs would love that versatility. And considering that the Habs, I think, are relatively confident moving forward with Suzuki and Doc as their top 2 centers moving forward, for better or for worse, I think they'd be definitely open to picking another big European winger. And I think that Brandsegg-Nygard at 8 is a very, very solid selection and wouldn't be a reach here either and would make a lot of sense on various levels for the Habs.
absolutely. Speaking of European forwards, I also think Konsta Helenius should be in this conversation. I
Yeah.
really like the intelligence, the awareness, the advanced scanning habits, all the things that kind of have made Slafkovsky struggle, especially in his draft year. Konsta Helenius has in spades. So I don't think there's going to be as difficult to transition to the pro game in North America as there was with Slafkovsky. On top of that, he's really skillful, defensively responsible. The effort level is there. There's a really interesting core package to work with. I think at 8 they probably have better options, but Helenius has a lot of what I like in a player, and I wouldn't be surprised for them to go that route, especially with a need for centers.
For sure.
That's one thing that I think the Habs could benefit from, and if Helenius could become your top line center down the line, which is it's not a realistic possibility, but it's certainly there and among the options
Yeah.
available. I think in terms of upside, he's one of the only ones with like a top line proper upside if everything works out. Um, I think that's a decent pick. And if they end up not being as confident with Mayu as we are, as well, with his upside, we're not too kind of sold on the top
Yeah.
4 defenseman upside. If they don't see that with Mayu and the season continues to go as it has, the options at right D are pretty interesting. I mean, you have Artyom Levshunov, Adam
Yeah.
Yurachek, but the one I
Those
want
are
them
the
to go
2 I was
for,
gonna say, yeah. I think
yeah,
those are the 2 that the Habs would like a lot.
but the one I think I would go for would be Zane Perek, and
There's a
that
big
would,
difference of what we would go for and what
yeah,
the Habs are likely to go for. I think
realistically,
the
yeah.
prospect of having a future power play that has 2 defensemen, the top power play unit with Hutson and Perek,
Oh my goodness.
right? Like, it's just I don't know if I can resist that. Like, as long as
Don't make me
Demito's off
hope.
the board,
Yeah,
I'd
like
be picking Perek personally. But
100%.
is it the most likely Habs pick? Probably not. What is it? The most
No.
fun Habs pick? Maybe.
I would take him. I would absolutely. Oh my goodness, the things I would do to see that power play combo, on the top power play unit. But yeah, that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like what you've been watching, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in for our future episodes. We've got 2 more coming up this week. Make sure to tune in for those. So this has been Hadi with Sebastian. Hi, and we hope you tune in next time.